The midday sun was high over the small Texas town when Evelyn Carter's life was about to change forever. She was known by her neighbors as a quiet, elderly black woman who kept mostly to herself, tending to her ranch and living off the land her father had passed down. But what nobody knew was that Evelyn carried a history buried deep beneath her calm exterior. A history written in the deserts of faraway lands, where she had served as one of the most skilled Special Forces snipers the country had ever trained. She had walked away from war decades ago, trading her rifle for peace and solitude. But on that day, peace came to her door in the form of chaos. A convoy of cartel trucks rolled down the dusty road and stopped right in front of her property. Men spilled out, armed and arrogant, ready to claim land that didn't belong to them. To them, she was just an old black woman, easy to push aside. What they didn't know was that they had just stepped onto the wrong ranch, facing someone they were entirely unprepared for. This wasn't just a fight over property. This was a story about dignity, survival, and a truth America often chooses to forget. Because Evelyn Carter was about to remind the world that age and race do not define strength, and when the dust settled, her story would echo far beyond the fields she fought for. What happens when the forgotten finally fight back? Watch carefully, because this is not just her story, it could be all of ours. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, because stories like this one must be heard. Evelyn Carter's days usually began before the sun had fully risen. The wide Texas sky stretched pale blue over fields her father had once plowed with his bare hands, and every corner of her ranch whispered memories of the family who had fought to keep it alive. At 72, Evelyn worked slower than she once did, but there was still a steadiness in her movements, a rhythm of resilience that spoke of someone who had never known surrender. She tended the horses, repaired the fences when storms tore them down, and still drove her old pickup into town for supplies, her back straight, her eyes sharp. To the casual observer, she was just another elderly rancher living out her twilight years in peace. Yet anyone who looked closer might notice the photographs on her mantle, images of her in uniform, medals gleaming, her younger self crouched in deserts and forests with eyes that carried no fear. Evelyn had been many things in her life: a daughter, a soldier, a survivor, but now she was just Evelyn, guarding her father's land, her family's pride, with nothing more than her presence. The community respected her from a distance, though some whispered she didn't belong, that black families had no claim to ranches like hers. Evelyn had heard it all before, but she never wavered. She knew the land's worth, not in money, but in blood, sweat, and heritage. She believed that life had finally given her a chance to rest, that the battles were behind her. But she was wrong. Because while Evelyn's heart longed for peace, the world around her was shifting, growing darker. Shadows were gathering, whispers of men who had set their sights on her ranch. And though she didn't yet know it, the skills she thought she had buried with her military past would soon be called upon once again. The ordinary days she had fought so hard to preserve were about to shatter, and the test that lay ahead would be unlike any she had faced before. It began subtly at first, the sound of engines on the road, dust rising where no neighbors should be traveling. Evelyn stood on her porch, wiping her hands on a rag, her sharp eyes narrowing as black SUVs rolled past the wooden gates of her ranch. These weren't visitors. They were scouts, and she knew it. In the days that followed, the presence grew stronger. Strangers parked on the road, watching. The sheriff's office, when she called, brushed her off with empty promises, their words carrying that familiar weight of dismissal she had known her whole life. "You're overreacting, Miss Carter," they said. But Evelyn's instincts were too sharp to be ignored. She noticed signs of intrusion, tire tracks near her barn, footprints where there should have been none. The men weren't hiding their intentions. They were testing her, waiting for the moment to strike. Soon enough it came. One bright afternoon, when the sun burned high in the sky, they returned, not in twos or threes, but in droves. Trucks screeched to a halt outside her property, and armed men jumped out, laughing, pointing, moving with the arrogance of predators who believed they had already won. Evelyn's heart thumped, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something buried deep but not forgotten. She slipped inside, opened a trunk she hadn't touched in years, and there it was. The rifle that had seen her through deserts and jungles, still clean, still deadly. The past she thought she had buried was alive in her hands once more. Outside, the men shouted, demanding she come out, threatening what they would do to her ranch if she resisted. But Evelyn was no stranger to intimidation. She had faced worse than this. Her ranch wasn't just land, it was her family, her history, her bloodline. They wanted to erase her, to claim what generations before her had built, simply because they thought she was powerless. But Evelyn was not powerless. As she moved into position, every step calculated, every breath steady, the rising tension was undeniable. The storm was here. The fight was no longer coming, it had arrived. And Evelyn Carter, underestimated and overlooked, was ready. The attack unfolded with brutal clarity. In broad daylight, under the scorching Texas sun, the cartel poured onto her land like a wave of destruction. They spread across the field, rifles slung casually, their confidence so thick it blinded them to the danger they were walking into. Evelyn had positioned herself in the hayloft of the old barn, her rifle steady, her breathing slow. She had done this before, too many times to count, but never had the stakes felt so personal. This wasn't a foreign battlefield, this was her home. The first shot rang out, cracking through the air, and one of the men dropped where he stood. Chaos erupted. Shouts, scrambling, gunfire spraying blindly. But Evelyn was disciplined, her hands moving with the precision of years of training. She hit her marks one by one, forcing the invaders into cover, their arrogance unraveling into fear. They had come expecting an easy conquest, but they had stumbled into a war zone, commanded by a soldier who knew every inch of the land better than they ever could. Still, they pushed back. A bullet tore through the wooden beam inches from her head, dust filling her lungs as she adjusted her scope. They tried to rush the barn, but Evelyn was already gone, moving silently across the rafters, slipping out the back, reappearing where they least expected. The heat, the noise, the adrenaline, it was all consuming. Yet Evelyn's mind was steady, her body moving like it had been carved for this moment. When one man finally broke through the barn door, shouting, weapon raised, she was already behind him, pressing the cold barrel of her pistol to his back before he could take another step. The fight stretched into hours, her land echoing with gunfire, the smell of dust and powder heavy in the air. The men, so sure of themselves, were now desperate, retreating, dragging their wounded. And when the last truck screeched away, leaving bodies and silence behind, Evelyn Carter stood alone in the sunlight, her rifle smoking, her chest heaving. She had defended her home. She had reminded them, and herself, that she was not to be erased. But as she looked across the scarred fields, she knew this victory carried a heavier weight. The world might not understand what she had done, but Evelyn knew. This was not the end. It was only when the dust finally settled, Evelyn Carter's land stood silent again. But it was no longer the same. The cartel had been driven out. Some by force, some by fear, all by the realization that the woman they had underestimated was far more than what they had assumed. The sheriff's office, slow to respond and reluctant to act, finally showed up when the noise of the confrontation reached too many ears in town. But by then it was clear, Evelyn had defended her home, her history, her very existence, with nothing but the strength of her will and the skills they thought had died with her service years ago. She walked the ranch slowly that evening, her boots pressing into soil she refused to surrender. The broken signpost her father had carved was gone, but in its place she imagined something greater, a reminder that her family's name was etched not in wood, but in the land itself. The barn still stood, the fences still stood, and she still stood, but the scars remained, invisible yet heavy, because Evelyn knew this was never just about property, it was about power. About the way society, even after decades of her service and sacrifice, still treated her skin as a target and her age as weakness. Neighbors came, some in awe, some whispering that she had gone too far. Others nodded silently, understanding the unspoken truth. If Evelyn had not fought back, no one would have fought for her. The law had failed her. The system had turned its back. And the men who tried to erase her would have succeeded, if not for her refusal to be erased. It was a reminder of something far greater than one ranch. Evelyn Carter's story was not just hers. It was the story of countless black men and women across America who found themselves defending what should never have been threatened, whether it be dignity, livelihood, or life itself. Her victory, though hard-earned, came with the bitter taste of reality. How many more battles like hers were being fought in silence without the world ever knowing? How many were lost before they could even begin? She stood on her porch at sunset, the horizon painted gold. Her rifle leaned against the wall beside her, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. She didn't want violence. She didn't crave war. But when injustice came to her door, she had no choice. And isn't that the tragedy? That an elderly black woman had to summon the soldier in her just to be heard, just to be seen, just to be left in peace? Her story forces us to ask how much has really changed. If a veteran who gave her life to the country still has to fight for her right to simply exist, what does that say about the promises of equality and justice? How many Evelyn Carters will it take before society decides enough is enough? She breathed deep, the weight of both victory and sorrow pressing on her chest. She had survived. She had won. But she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just one chapter in a book that keeps writing itself, generation after generation. And as you